Hi, my name is Benedict. This video is from the perspective of a mix engineer and a composer. I'm going to say from the perspective of a mix engineer overall, simply because I've had these instances come to me quite a few too many times. Now, I've talked about some of this before in the Simple Songwriting series, the second one with the Falling Down in Love song with Jake. Now, it wasn't Jake's thing, but I talked about the little details that take a song from being functional to magical. And I've faced a few instances with clients recently, or with client work, that's come across, and I don't want to name any of them, although one of them well and truly deserves to be put in the poo for his, well, shall we say, unchristian manners, but that's his business, is that there are things that if you do them, or more to the point, don't do them, as a composer, you can't get a good mix. Everything can be done perfectly, but your song will still sound wrong. A lot of what makes music work is this elusive term, groove. Now, groove is really important. It doesn't matter what kind of music that you're working in, whether it's full-on Mozartian classical, opera, death metal, pop, doesn't matter. Things have to have a groove. Basically, that means everything has to belong together and belong to the piece, or it falls apart. Here's an example. Here's one that came out of a piece, and I could never get it right because it was broken. I didn't show this to the person in the end because it didn't turn out to be needed. He was happy with how it was, but his piece always sounds broken because of this. Now, he's paid, I believe, some other people on Fiverr, Upwork, whatever, don't know, don't care, to make his piece. And I think what's happened is that the person who's making the music has gone, ooh, there's a funky drum loop. And on its own, it does sound funky. Oh, look, there's a nice bass loop. And on its own, it sounds nice. But he's never thought, how do they go together? And this is a massive danger with using loops, whether they're audio loops or MIDI loops. But I've seen plenty of composers do exactly the same thing with raw composition by not thinking, how does this go together? So looking at this picture here, we can see where the beats are fairly clearly. This is the drum line, and it was combined whole drum kit. This is the bass line, which is just the bass. Now, I've marked the beat divisions which are correct. This is on a beat division here. As you can see, it's half of whatever this is. I think this is an 8th note. So this is on the 16th. That's between the two. Doesn't matter what the division is. We can see fairly clearly this here, that's in time. This here is on a beat division. That's in time. This is not tight, but close enough. It's not entirely in the pocket because the groove doesn't match, but we can live with that. But what is wrong is this. There's a small kick. It's not entirely a ghost, it's noticeable, and that doesn't belong on any beat division. At least not any beat division based around the bass. So I can keep dividing this into two, 8th, 16th, 32nd, 64th, nothing hits this. Now, it may be a legitimate timing based on a triplet or based on swing. This may be swung, just like this. I can't remember whether it was a kick or snare at this point. I think it's a snare, but whatever this is here that's slightly out of his timing, that's okay. It may be that this is a pulled snare, as in it's slightly behind. That's perfectly okay. But the thing is, this drum pattern has a certain groove, which is that it's got a beat here. Yeah, it's got the usual 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's got this extra little bit, and the bass line has not taken that into account. So every time you play this song, it sounds a little bit broken because it stumbles over itself. The brain is trying to work out, well, is that right or is that right? Or is that right? No, whatever we do, it's wrong, because this goes around over and over and over again. Whoever's composed it has not taken this into account. Now, if they'd taken that into account and moved this bass note here, or even double tapped that bass note, then it probably would work. But it doesn't. And when it comes to mixing, people want it to be more. And part of that is groove. Part of that is that we've got to put that together. Let me show you an example. This is something that I just built purely to show you the example. Let's pick a drum pattern. Sounds great. Must be great. Wonderful. We'll go with it. Now let's build a bass line. Wonderful, funky, cool, let's go with it. You might notice it's not great. Now let me show you what a mix engineer is likely to do. This is pretty standard stuff. The drums and bass, or at least the kick and bass, are put into a bus. They are made to work together. Let's get our compressor up here. Okay, that's off for the moment. Yes, okay, no, sorry, I made this a couple of days ago. It's off. We can feel that it works together, but at the same time it doesn't. Now, what if I do this? This is what the mix engineer is likely to do to try to emphasize that groove. Does that sound better? No, if anything, it actually sounds worse. There's a sort of hesitancy. It can't decide which way it wants to go. Whether it wants to be Arthur or whether it wants to be Martha, it doesn't know what it wants to do. That is confusing. Now, if I fire that back to a client, then either they're going to be blind to it because they were already blind to it, or they're going to come back and go, it just doesn't funk hard enough, Benedict. And I'm going to have to say to them, well, Mr. Client, part of the reason it doesn't funk hard enough is because it's funkin' broken. While that may seem funky on its own, let's just pop this in solo. Together, they don't work. What if we went for a simpler line? Can you hear straight away that actually is more powerful, it's more punchy. May not be as funky, but it's more punchy, and that's without compression. Let's put that compression back in. Oof. That's got a real to it. So that's grooving like a bastard. That's good. So we actually don't need to write funky bass lines to get a good groove. We've just got to decide, where are the hits? How do I make them line up? How do I avoid that silly thing where we've got a hit here and a hit here and none where it matters? So a simpler bass line will deliver us a better result than an unconnected but apparently funky bass line. Let's pop out of that. Let's try another bass line. That's grooving pretty nicely too. What do we got? Very similar. But we've made a little bit of movement and it's still grooving very nicely. Our timing's no different. But what if we move to this? Again, let's turn off the compressor. Compressor. We can feel a groove in there. Whether it's a good groove or a bad groove, irrelevant. This is a training exercise. But we've now got a funky drum line that we liked, and we've got a funky bass line, and it's eminently mixable because what's going to come out on the other end is better than what went in. How do we know? Grooving. Grooving harder. So the thing to really walk away with here is know your important points. In this case, we've got a kick here, a kick here, a kick here, and a kick here. I know because I listened and I just worked out where they were. In which case, we're going to put our strong notes here, our emphasis notes here. What they are, your business. There's technically no reason we couldn't have put that one up here as a beep, 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 beep kind of a thing, a slap thing, whatever. But I've put them there and then allow us to use the other beat divisions creatively, oddly, funkily. So we've transformed that which is a bit of a disaster and the compressor is probably making it worse, to this. You probably can tell straight away which is more likely to make you want to take your pants off and run around with them in your head. It should be this one because it fundamentally works. So when you're working on making your track, make sure that every element within that track is working with the groove. If you've set your drum beat as your groove definer, which most people do, and I'm not a big fan of, because I think it should be your melodic and rhythmic instruments, your vocal line that set your groove, and then your drums make that groove bigger. But whichever way you go, whichever is the lead, taking the lead in that sense. Like your band member may walk in with this funky bass line. Let's say he walked in with this bass line up the top, the one that's not working. Then it's your drummer's job to understand that bass line and then start tapping things in a way that funkify, that fortify that bass line so that, seeing they match, when we come to whack a compressor on them, they are going to groove hard. And that's good. Doesn't matter whether you're in dance or classical, as I said before. This is how you make a piece come together. Every time you break that and decide to put things in, well, less than sensible spots for the groove of your track, you actually make your track start to come to pieces. And while a mix engineer can do all the right things, it'll always sound a bit broken. It'll never funk as hard as you want it to. So that's number one. Number two, I don't have anything to show you, but this is super important. I've met it too many times in the last couple of weeks, and it's very frustrating. I have to try to find ways to cover it, and that's sort of okay. My job is to make pieces sound as good as they can. But you know what? I shouldn't need to do this, and it's not about me trying to avoid something. It's just my fix is never going to sound as good as getting it right in the first place. So we'll use the example of, because I had several of these, having a cool lead line. And it stops. Either I'm given like a 1 or 2 bar break and then something else starts, like the next section, or and then the next section's right there. There's no transition. Now, where somebody's given a couple of bars break and then going whoop, they're trying to make a transition. But the problem is you've still got that transition from your solo to your whoop to your that's going to come, whatever coming next. With your solo, and once you hit that low note, you can either let that run to the end of the bar, and as the next section starts, you're either going to be on that note already because that's your root note. So if you're in C major, your solo may well have finished on a C, low C, high C, whatever. And your next chord that comes in to start your next section is probably going to be a C, because you're in C major, in which case, guess what? They mesh. They join together. They are connected. You've now created a flowing transition. You can hold that note for a little bit. If you don't know what the mix engineer is going to want to do with it, just hold it for a few bars. Because he can fade it out or whatever. That's if you really don't know what to do with it. You probably should be working out what to do with it, but that'll do. It's better than just going and then stopping. Because that dead stop with a dead start of the next thing is just things butted together. It might just work, but the problem is it's not elegant. And when you're composing and when you're mixing, it's to bring the magic, to make this thing magical, because that's what makes people remember one thing from another. Toto wrote a couple of songs. One of them was Rosanna, and the other one was called Africa. You know how I can tell them apart? Because they're magical, and they've got different elements in them. And it's nothing to do with the obvious things. It's how they all connect together that creates the magic that is Rosanna, or the magic that is Africa. Pick any band you like. Any two random songs from random bands that you like. The things that make them memorable is the magic, and it's often in the transitions. So, your job as a composer, as is my job as a mix engineer, is to think not just from here to here, but from here to here. I'm about to introduce a new sound. I'm about to introduce a new element. How do I get it in? Just did a mix where there was an intro, some synths, didn't sound like that at all. It was better than that, thankfully. And then suddenly there's a vocal. Just suddenly, out of nothing, there was this vocal. And you might think, but all songs do that. No, they don't. There's normally some kind of little lead up, but because there was no lead up, the first time I heard that vocal, anytime I listened to that piece and I hadn't been listening to it already, it was like, there's a vocal. Not cool. Nothing wrong with the vocal, but just that surprise. There was nothing to tell me there was something coming. It's just, like somebody sneaks up behind you and goes, they haven't necessarily done anything wrong, but you just weren't aware of them. You didn't hear the footsteps. Nothing led you to know that they were going to be there. So you go, ah! You don't want to do that to your audience, unless that's the whole plan. Like Deep Purple's Chasing Shadows. It's deliberately scary. But the way I solved that in the mix was that I took one of his snares and I put it as a little ghost snare just before the first beat where his vocal starts. So you've got the musical part, the instruments, and the e, and then and they flow together. That little snare is just enough. It's not the most elegant, but it's just enough to say something's coming. So when the vocal comes in, it doesn't come as a shock. It's nice. It's like, oh, something new's happened here. But it's not like don't touch me. That was one. The other was, yes, the one that I was talking about with a solo that comes to an end and just stops dead and then the next thing starts. That one, I had to add in delays. I already had a delay on that synth that was doing the solo, had to ramp up the feedback and the mix of the delay to try to at least just carry that sound through so that it didn't just stop hard. Now, fair enough, he's done the right thing. He sent me very dry stems, like very, very dry, and that's great. Sounds horrid, but it's great because it means that I can build the sounds that I feel I need to build. But it really pointed out that this solo just coming to an end was a problem. He hadn't thought about how we're going to A, move into this solo, and B, move out of this solo into the next section. It was like, I'll build this block, I'll butt the two blocks together and that'll be good. Yeah, but it's not going to make a winning track. So we've got to think in terms of every sound you introduce, every part you introduce, how are we bringing it in? If you were to introduce two people, let's say you knew two people who you thought might, rub up against each other and enjoy each other's company, would you grab them, bang them together and say, go make babies? It might be funny. Could be funny if you saw it on a TV show. But would you do it? Would you like it done to you? No, you'd probably be like, John, meet Mary. Mary, meet John. We like both of you. We thought maybe you might make friends with each other and then go have babies. At least that sort of eases a little bit. If you're being really kind, you might even say to both John and Mary, here, look, we're going to introduce you to each other. Whatever. Sometimes it's better not to say anything. Sometimes it's good to say something. But nonetheless, you're looking to ease that transaction. And when you're writing something, every new sound, you've got to ease that transaction of. Make it welcome. There are some things naturally where suddenly something appears. And that's great. But there are plenty of times where it works its way up to. Really important. When an element comes in, whether it's a sound or a section, you've got to decide how it's coming in. If it's a sax solo, don't just necessarily hit it with that first note unless that's meant to be ooh. Chances are you're going to run up. So the sax may actually start playing a bar earlier, but just not super noticeably. It might start to play and then that's what you want to do. But when you get to the end, you don't just have the guy take the sax out of his mouth, walk off stage, walk out of the back of the venue. That's not cool. You're going to get to the end, and then he's got to integrate back into the rest of the piece. He doesn't have to play for the rest of the piece. He may be able to leave the stage, go and have a beer, pick up Tina Turner. That whatever happens, that's your business as a composer. But make sure that as he's done, he integrates back in somehow. As I've said to you already, the easy way is to pick the root note, have him fall either on that at the end of his solo or on that as the first note of the next bar, which will happen to be the root note of your first chord. Or, again, you can use any of your safe notes. You can use your fifth, which in C is going to be a G, and you can probably get away with a F, which is a fourth, a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth, or a third, which is your E. Either way, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what you use, but there'll still be some way to at least just tie it in so that we feel like these parts all come together. So handle a note, every note, as where does this belong? Is it in time? Is it in the right groove? If it's not, move it. The groove doesn't happen because you tell it to. The groove happens because you make it. You can't say it's funky because I want it to be funky. I mean, you can, but that's going to fail. More than you succeed anyway. Every note, set it out. Don't let it just hang there and become a dead dog in the piece. I've met few too many of those, where somebody just holds a note or a chord and then it just becomes a dead dog. We don't want to do that. Think, how does this flow in, through, and out? Now, speaking of out, the last bit of this, let's go back to our loop. I say we've been listening to this for a while, and it's been a really cool song. And then let's say this song comes to an end. Is that a satisfying end? I really hope that you say, no, that was pretty pathetic. Because while you can make great advantage of sudden endings, that's not a sudden ending, that's just a I gave up. And you don't want people to walk away from your song going, oh, that guy just gave up. It was going okay and then he gave up. Because what makes them want to commit to you again? Because you've left them with a give up kind of a vibe. So make sure you finish. Now, one of the simplest finishes is, again, your root note. So there are a couple of things we can do. Let's mute our bass for the moment. Drums. There. Look. We've just used a little bit of drumulation to have a sense that here, something different's happened. This has probably ended. So if you want nothing else, you can just hit your kick drum, maybe your kick and snare or kick and hi-hat. It's better than nothing. At least it showed you tried. But seeing you've probably got a bass and maybe some other instruments, hopefully. See how they tie together. Is it the best ending ever? No. Does it work? Yes. It shows that we've tried far more than just, oh, well, I've turned the sequencer off now. I guess we can all just go. I hope you were impressed. Because now we've got... That tells us we've come to an end. I'm sure you can do better than this, but just see how that extra 1 bar with a few things all nicely together. You know, as we've got the key points and our root note, boom, right with our final kick. So we get a nice, we've got a good groove even on that last one as our kick and our bass together. Nice groove that the compressor really is able to pull out. So that's part of the last thing, but the bigger picture of your piece has come to an end. Don't just turn off the sequencer and wander off stage. Have an ending, because that ending tells people, oh, we're finished now, we've come home, we're done. Hope you've enjoyed this, because they're more likely to want to go again. Okay, that's basically it. If you have any questions, if you're looking to get some work done with me, ask down below. You have a good day now.